This is Judy Copeland, pastor of the Hancock Congregational Church in Hancock, New Hampshire. And although it looks like it will still be some time yet before we are back in our beloved meeting house, we want to continue to bring you a little Sunday inspiration. One of the things that we have been doing is going back to some cherished passages of Scripture. We know that not all of us have the bandwidth right now to dig into new things, so we're focusing on some beloved familiars. Last week it was Psalm 23. This week it is the teachings of Jesus known as the Beatitudes. Back in October, I had a chance to visit the official Church of the Beatitudes in Israel, which was in many ways a beautiful disappointment. And I say a beautiful disappointment because I think I brought a certain set of expectations to the occasion. I think I was hoping for something, more rustic, something that would have had more of the flavor of Jesus' own day, a setting where I could imagine the first century Jesus offering these words of blessings, maybe a natural amphitheater or a grassy knoll. But instead, the Church of the Beatitudes is a stylized Neo-Byzantine church designed by the Italian architect Antonio Barzulli and built in the 1930s. It's got lots of marble veneer, a beautiful golden mosaic dome, and the grounds are heavily landscaped. And it's beautiful, but in its opulence, it wasn't exactly sort of an aesthetic match for me. And I think that day our guide sensed our group's discomfort because he pulled us away from the tour buses and the gift shop, and he found a quiet spot and he sat us down and he read to us the Beatitudes in Hebrew. Now, the camera work is a little shaky and the birds chirp a little too loudly in passages, but I thought you might like to hear what the Beatitudes sounded like in something closer to Jesus' original language.
אשרי הרעבים והצמאים לצדק כי הם ישבעו. אשרי הרחמנים כי הם ירוחמו. אשרי ברי לבב כי הם יראו את אלוהים. אשרי רודפי שלום כי בני אלוהים יקראו. אשרי הנרדפים בגלל הצדק כי להם מלכות שמיים. אשרי אם יחרפו ויגדפו אתכם ויעלילו לכם בגללי, שמחו וגילו, כי ספרכם רב בשמיים, הרי כך רדפו הד הנביאים אשר לפניכם.
And in English from Matthew's Gospel, when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him, and he began to speak, and he taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. Taken from a passage of Scripture known as the Sermon on the Mount. The Beatitudes are sometimes referred to as the Magna Carta of the Christian faith, revealing the divine ideal. It is the charter for the Christian life and a priceless deposit of religious and spiritual insight. One of the key sections of the Sermon on the Mount, it is found in abbreviated form in Luke's Gospel and more fully developed in Matthew. And beatitude, of course, is just another word for blessing or blessedness. The list in Luke's account is shorter. There are only about 4 blessings. But Matthew gives us a longer, more robust list, 8 or 9 beatitudes, depending on how you count them. And remember that Matthew is sometimes known as the teacher among the gospel writers, the biblical author who takes the sayings of Jesus and presents them as a Talmudic scholar might, offering commentary and interpretation as he goes along. At the outset, we should probably say something just about the word blessed, which is, of course, that rhythmic refrain or that word that appears at the beginning of every line of the Beatitudes. The word in Greek is makarios, which in some English translations, some of the more contemporary ones, they've unfortunately begun to translate that as happy. Happy are the poor, happy are the hungry, happy are those who mourn. And of course, we know it doesn't work that way. Being poor or being hungry or being in mourning doesn't make anyone happy. And the better translation, I think, is the more common one, blessed are, and perhaps best of all is the translation honored are. Honored are the poor, honored are the meek and the lowly. Jesus is offering this teaching with his newly gathered disciples circled around him, but further out in the crowd are the very people described in the passage. He is reminding his disciples not to turn away from the disenfranchised. These are the ones to be honored, he says. These are the ones who are blessed. Blessed because their life experience has shown them something of God. Now, this was radical stuff in the ancient world where, to an even greater degree than in our own, blessings were seen as acquisitions. Divine favor was measured in terms of how many attributes of the good life you managed to collect: land and livestock, wives and wealth, offspring and olive groves. But Jesus was saying a new thing, as Jesus often is. Blessings, at least as Jesus understood them, are not things to be piled up and amassed as evidence of God's favor. Remember the lyrics from that Irving Berlin song that Bing Crosby sang in White Christmas? When I'm worried and I can't sleep, I count my blessings instead of sheep. When my bankroll is getting small, I think of when I had none at all. I think about a nursery and I picture curly heads, and one by one I count them as they slumber in their beds. It's not that counting blessings is a bad thing. If we're talking about gratitude, it's a good place to begin. But if we are talking about feeling blessed and touched by God at the very deepest level, what Jesus is getting at in the Sermon on the Mount, then it's not that laundry list of worldly things that we have a tendency to enumerate and write in our gratitude journals. For Jesus, blessings are not trophies. Think about the things that Jesus blesses in his ministry, the things that he physically lays hands upon and blesses. He blesses children. He blesses loaves and fishes. He blesses bread and wine. He blesses things that are not permanent, always things with a very short shelf life. And why so many transitory blessings? So many things that will come but then go, things that we will have but only for a short while. Because the belief that Jesus is leading us to is a deep trust in God, a trust wherein we know that God will give us what we need, not once, but again and again as needed. We don't have to hoard things, not even toilet paper. We don't have to possess them at all costs or snatch them out of someone's hands or devote all of our life's energies to building up moats and castles and emotional security systems to safeguard those precious gifts. What Jesus offers us in the Beatitudes is a description of the places where we can expect to experience and feel God's blessings. The Beatitudes do not name places of comfort or success in people's lives, but rather places of vulnerability. You know, generally speaking, God doesn't come in when we're at the top of our game and say, bravo. We don't need the boost then. Those moments they take care of themselves. But what our faith teaches us, what Jesus offers us in the Beatitudes, is the promise that God will find us in those moments when we most need and therefore are perhaps most open to encouragement. Look at the situations that Jesus spells out specifically in the Beatitudes. Where are God's blessings delivered? in times when we feel impoverished, when we feel spiritually depleted, when we are trapped in the thick fog of grief, when we have a job to do that is utterly overwhelming, when we feel that everything is falling apart or that no one seems to care. There, Jesus says, that's where blessing gets its foot in the door. Sometimes we don't even realize that the blessing has arrived until later when the door, begins to swing open a little wider. Where we need God is where we get God. A blessing is something that puts us in touch with God and transfers some of God's love and some of God's energy to us when we need it most. A blessing is that feeling of peace and possibility that flies in the face of what may be unfolding in real time. A blessing is that influx of grace that settles and soothes even the most anxious of spirits. A blessing is the assurance that everything is going to be all right. It is going to be all right because although life may have excluded us from the way we wanted it to be, it has not and will never exclude us from the innermost circle of God's love. If there is a contemporary expert on blessings, I would have to nominate a woman named Jan Richardson. She's a native Floridian, an artist, a painter, a retreat leader, a United Methodist minister who often collaborated with her musician husband Gary before he died of complications following surgery for a brain aneurysm in 2012. It was a sudden, untimely death that rocked her to the very core. And even though before his death she had written many blessings, was known for that somewhat, that work only intensified after Gary died. And she's collected many of those in a book called A Cure for Sorrow, in which she writes, "I have come to see with greater and greater clarity that a blessing is at its most potent in times of disaster, devastation, and loss. When God's providence seems most difficult to find, a blessing helps us perceive the grace that threads through our lives." She writes that blessing is not an orderly or that grief is not an orderly process, and that it doesn't unfold through progressions of stages, neat stages, that it's unruly, and it doesn't follow a prescribed path. It causes what we had treated as solid to give way. It opens new seams of mourning in places we thought settled. It spirals us back through layers of sorrow we thought we had dealt with. And while Richardson writes from the depths of a great and wrenching personal loss, this time of COVID-19 is a season of griefs, great and small, the deaths for sure, but also the way that so many celebrations of important life occasions have evaporated. Weddings and graduations and new babies that can't be shown off to grandparents or held by grandparents. And while we grieve for those losses, the monumental ones, we also grieve for the small ones too. But in this context, the Beatitudes continue to speak to us. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Or to use Jan Richardson's phrasing, in the cure for sorrows is always the same. The cure for sorrows is love. That's all. The cure for sorrow is when we recognize the presence of love. As we finish up this morning, we have a beautiful arrangement of Blessed Assurance. And as you listen to Charlie's guitar rendition of it, I want you to think about using this time to meditate, to bring to mind the places in your own life and the people in your surrounded life who may need an extra touch of that reassuring love right now. When she wrote this hymn 150 years ago, the blind hymnist Fanny Crosby used these words. She wrote, "Echoes of mercy, whispers of love." I think that's in the second stanza. Echoes of mercy and whispers of love. That's what our faith is about. Finding those echoes of mercy and whispers of love for ourselves, but then, and most importantly perhaps, passing them on to others. This is our story. This is our song. Blessed Assurance. Amen.
Amen.